You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions. This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Become a patron today at patreon.com/intotheportal.
Hello, I'm Amber A.
And I'm Andrew McKay.
And you're listening to Into the Portal, your gateway to the bizarre.
On this episode, we once again tap into our Patreon vault and take you guys on a trip back to the Dark Ages as we search for the legendary King Arthur. Man or myth? You decide. And special thanks to our Patreon supporters who made this episode a reality, and to our latest Patreon members as well, Audrey and Paige M. You guys are rock stars. Thank you so much.
And now, folks, let's get ready for a special Patreon Vault release on one of the most famous figures of the British Isles that may or may not have existed at all.
490 CE, somewhere in the British Isles. A dense fog rolled across the hills and the shallow glen that lay before the knights under Arthur's command. Those brave enough to ride forth from the court at Camelot, towards an enemy that they knew all too well. 1,600 strong had gathered to stave off attacks from the warring Saxon clans, waiting in eerie silence. Nothing but the wind to be heard, unable to see beyond several feet in front of them, waiting for the bloodshed to begin. Then, the silence was broken by a distant horn. Faint, but growing louder and louder, echoing through the fog as if it were an apparition wailing from a distant past. And then, the clanging of metal, armor and shields, footsteps, and the roar of attack. Such was the narrative of many tales of the Dark Ages. However, to some, they are far beyond mere fable. Sometime during the 5th and 6th centuries CE, there was said to have lived a fierce warrior, noble leader, and a mighty king known as the legendary Arthur. Ruler of the Britons and defeater of the warring Saxons, King Arthur is arguably the most well-known historical figure in the history of the British Isles. But was he in fact a true historical figure, lost through the cracks of official recorded history? Or could Arthur be more than just one man? Welcome to ITP's May full-length exclusive episode. Join us as we search for Arthur's bones, the court of Camelot, and the truth behind the man believed by some to be a very real king.
Hello, and welcome back into the portal. I'm Amber A.
And I'm Andrew McKay. We are talking about something that's kind of been on the list for a while, falls under a few categories of ITP, but we're talking about the legend of King Arthur today. Mm-hmm. Truth, myth, was he a real person? Did he really accomplish the things that are told in the fables? So many incredible stories, right?
Or was he simply an amalgamation of a bunch of different people and historical figures and amazing accomplishments?
That's right.
So we're going to get into it all.
We're diving into it. So obviously one of the most well-known historical figures that's ever existed ever, really. I mean, everybody has heard of King Arthur before, right? But the question, of course, is did he really exist? Or was he a king of just legend and, told by nobles to their children and things like that, right? Because obviously he exemplified everything you would want in a warrior and a king. So yeah, this episode we're going to dig right into the search for his bones. That's one part of it. The other part of it is the search for Camelot. Those are kind of the two avenues here to try to prove whether or not he is indeed a real person. And that beep is our bacon. If you guys can hear that, I don't know if you can.
Bacon
We're going to
alarm.
go get that. Okay, where was I? So King Arthur, definitely the most legendary character to come out of the British Isles for sure. And, his character and, stories of his bravery were a massive, massive part in the early formation of British identity. Because, for a lot of different reasons, we're going to discuss it as we go along here. But again, man, legend, myth, multiple figures, what the heck are we dealing with here? But there's so many different legends. So for instance, at various times throughout history, he was associated with various different groups, and this makes it really murky, right? For example, in 1040, he was written as a figurehead of the Celtic Renaissance, whereas at other times he was referred to simply as a battle leader for the Britons. Other times he's been associated with Roman soldiers, Roman centurions.
Seems like everyone's trying to get a piece of Arthur.
A little bit. And of course, this is a period where very, very few records are kept. So
Well,
what is the era that we're dealing with here?
It's the era of the Dark Ages, called so mostly because of that. Essentially, there
Right.
was not a lot of written records, and people had lost a lot of things that had been gained during sort of like the golden era of the ancient sort of past. There was a kind of a murky time in the British Isles around this time. I always think of Tristan and Isolde.
Definitely.
Back to this.
Totally.
Because there was a lot of just warring tribes. There's a lot of very sectionalized regional sort of powers, and they were all kind of struggling, and there was a lot of less trade, a lot less communication, like we already said. It was basically dominated by superstitions of the time. There was a lot of religious debates going on too. So there's a lot of just instability, I would say.
Definitely.
Yes. Actually, it's interesting. London was founded, we just discovered this, because I was thinking to myself, London is way more modern than these times. But no, it was actually founded in 50 AD.
Right.
And it wouldn't have looked anything like how it looks today,
Of course,
obviously.
yeah.
And it was funny because I was like, oh, we're referring to London as a city. I feel like even the word city in itself has way different connotations. But essentially, you were right, Andrew. It's a concentration of a lot of people. It's a high population area,
Yeah.
all living in the same area, and mostly they're specialized, right? So they would have been serving specific functions within that sort of
Right.
polity or whatever you want to call it. But they were dangerous places.
Yeah.
Dangerous, mostly because they were made of wood for the large part. There would have been stone used in some, but
For sure.
wood was more widely available, and most castles were made of wood at this time, including the surrounding structures. So once one building goes up in smoke, all of it's basically going up in smoke, and that actually happened in Tristan and Isolde, right? So
Yeah.
they were ransacked, and I believe it was a group of Saxons in the beginning of that movie that come and just raid the village, burn it to the ground. And then Tristan, at this time, he's a baby, and he sees his parents basically get slaughtered along with the rest of his sort of council, his town council. And then from there, well, we're just getting into a review of Tristan and Isolde
Hey,
now,
we
but
covered on
from
Film
there,
Friday.
they end up deciding to build a stone castle that's much stronger.
Not a bad
So,
idea,
right?
guys. Not a bad idea.
Yeah, so it was a very violent time. Life expectancy at this point was about 30 years old, which you were lucky to achieve because it was so bloody, right? There was so much just violence in general and war. So a lot of young men were just sent like lambs to the slaughter.
Yes, they were indeed.
And then women, obviously, and all the villages and everything would have been just raided and pillaged and raped and whatever else.
Yep.
Lovely times. Don't you want to go back and just relive that?
Could you imagine just being a fly on the wall? Like 50
No.
50 AD.
I feel like every time we watch Game of Thrones, we're experiencing that.
A little bit, sort of.
But yeah, so this was the time where essentially there were references to Arthur. This came in the form of poetry, epic tales about heroic battles and quests under the helm of a man named Arthur. And it's again, right, it's very vague, but these started to appear at around the 5th and 6th centuries AD. And he was kind of referred to as a ruler of the Britons, known as a fierce warrior, a great commander, greatly respected by all. This is interesting, right? Because he has all these references in literature and in, poetry, whatever else,
Yeah.
and oral traditions mostly.
Right.
But there was really no, quote unquote, known or confirmed record of him before 594 AD. So there's kind of a gap in the history, and it kind of made scholars doubt his real existence. So they kind of thought, oh no, he's just a piece of fiction. He's just
Right.
a piece of the literature, a piece that was designed to inspire the Britons,
Yeah.
which would have a lot of political power, right? You know what I mean? Just to rally
Absolutely.
people together. So whether or not he was a real person, he would have served a very important function.
Yeah.
So
Definitely.
it's interesting, right? So many scholars do kind of, they debate it, obviously, and that's what we're getting into today, but they really doubt his existence. There are some that lean towards supporting it, and then there's others that lean away from it.
Yeah.
So again, right, like let's get into some of the more specifics here. So by 43 AD, the Romans had basically conquered the British Isles. So they were ruling over these Britons for the next 400 years. By the time Romans abandoned Britain, it was about 410 AD. And they essentially left it to the mercy of the Germanic Angles, the Saxons, and the Jute invaders. So this is the time of Arthur. So this is a time where they needed a hero. And this was their hero. It's like that song, right? I need a hero.
They really did.
Yeah.
They absolutely did. And like even what you described up above there too, with like London and it being kind of, densely populated, like fire traps, like rough places to live. It's like, life expectancy was really low. You really need a hero in times like this, right?
You really do.
Or at least you want to believe in one. It's stories like this that keep people mentally alive,
Exactly. Yeah. Keep the faith strong.
Right.
Because if there's someone that, is just seemingly invincible and he's on your side, then how much power does that give you? Everything's fine, right?
Yeah, not really. 2020's been a dumpster fire, seriously messing with people's mental health.
And if you're anything like me, you could probably use some help. So perhaps it's time you try BetterHelp.com. BetterHelp.com is a professional online counseling service that assesses your needs and matches you with your own licensed professional therapist from the comfort of your home, office, or wherever you are.
What's awesome is that BetterHelp.com is more affordable than traditional offline counseling as well. So you can connect with a licensed professional in under 24 hours for professional help, not self-help. And BetterHelp is committed to you right from the get-go. BetterHelp is committed to you from the get-go, from finding a great therapeutic match to making it easy and free to change counselors if the need arises.
BetterHelp.com has the huge advantage of being available on multiple platforms across the globe, so you have the help you need wherever you are, without ever sitting in an uncomfortable waiting room. We want you to start living a happier life today. As a listener, you'll get 10% off your first month by visiting BetterHelp.com/portal. Join over 1 million people taking charge of their mental health. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/portal.
Let's get into some of the legends because that's obviously what we're working with for information on Arthur, right? And there's so many different stories about this king. And this is a point of contention amongst the scholars, right? Because we're working with references from really early dates, and it comes all the way up into the most recent work, which is by Sir Thomas Malory, which we actually have a copy of that in our bookshelf here. But very, very packed full of fiction, right? I mean, it's a work of fiction. Was it inspired by pieces of truth from previous works? Is kind of like what scholars are trying to piece together when it comes to Arthur, right? But some of the legends that we all know about, right? Versions of the legends told about magic being used. Merlin is involved, right? Great battles, of course, where he slaughters, 900 men all by himself. Camelot and the Knights of the Round Table, the Round Table being the centerpiece of the Arthurian world, really, right?
Yep.
Because this is where this is the hub where he goes out and he's not conquering, but he's protecting the Britons, right, with his knights.
That's such an important symbol, even that, right? The idea of Arthur sitting with his council at this epic round table.
Exactly.
Yeah.
According to a 13th century poet by the name of Layamon, Arthur ordered the table to be built for him by a famous Cornish carpenter who somehow made the table capable of actually seating 1,600 men.
What?
Like a small mercenary army is essentially how it's described, right?
That's a big table.
That's a big table. Does seem a little crazy, right? Some of the sites that have been found where archaeologists are like, this could be the Great Hall of King Arthur, much, much smaller halls, right? You're not going to be fitting 1,600 people in there. So definitely goes along with the embellished legends, right? Potentially, because we haven't actually found Camelot, if it's a real place.
Right.
Some people think they have. We're going to get into this in a sec, right? Other stories claim that it was Merlin, the king's actual magician, who, and obviously the classic wizard, right?
Oh, yeah.
Some of the legends talk about Merlin being the one who actually made the table. He made it round in the likeness of the world. and sent out a call to all the bravest and truest knights to come and join the fellowship of King Arthur and sit at the court of Camelot.
Oh, that's epic. That reminds me of that, what is it, the White Wizard in
Oh yeah,
Lord of the Rings.
in Lord of the Rings, totally does, right? Other accounts, a little bit more reasonable, talk about as many as 150 knights who have sat at the round table. That sounds a little bit more likely, right?
Yeah.
Or at least have been under his command and yada, yada, yada. Regardless, the search for the Holy Grail is kind of the pinnacle of the legends linked to King Arthur, his knights and himself. This was their most noble quest. And of course, we all know of this from the Monty Python movie.
Of course.
King Arthur and the Search for the Holy Grail. And they pull out all these characters like King Arthur, his Guinevere, and Lancelot, and all these...
The Black Knight,
exactly, these classic characters, right? Let's get into some of the references in history and lore so we can try to actually piece together if he's a real person or not here.
Let's do it.
So the first reference we found... on a website called Historic UK, and it just covers a lot of different history stuff. It's dedicated to cases like Arthur, and the earliest reference to him, according to this website, is a poem, and this is corroborated by a lot of different stuff, but a poem from around 594 AD. This was written by a guy, this is going to be tough to pronounce.
Yep.
And Iron Gododin? That sounds like Norwegian or something.
It kind of does.
But anyway, it's actually Welsh. So the earliest surviving Welsh poem that consists of a series of separate elegies and talks about different battles, talks about a figure fighting against the Angles of Deira and Bernica, but basically just talks about the Britons being killed, and then a figure of Arthur comes up. In one of these elegies, there's a reference to a man named Arthur. It doesn't say King Arthur. It says that he was already a famous figure, but refers to him as like a battle leader.
Okay.
So, not a king. But
Not
this is one of the earliest references to him.
But in this poem, it was kind of interesting because it almost sets the stage for the idea that it was almost like when, was it Herodotus? Remember when he made references to people as if they had already, been famous? Oh, no, it wasn't Herodotus. It was another ancient text that we were looking at and we were trying to decide almost a very similar thing. But it was interesting because in this text, it's almost referring to him as if everyone already knows who he is. So as if he's already a famous figure.
Right. Yes. Which is important.
Exactly. So it's not introducing him. It's more so just alluding to him.
Yeah. Everyone already know about it. I'm just referencing it.
Yeah. So that, in my mind, begs the question, okay, so this poem survives, right? What about all the ones that could have been around previous to it? Or even just, not even poems, but just songs or something, or whatever. And people were just passing it word or mouth to mouth kind of thing, and from village to village. And then this is the one that happens to solidify and make it through the tests of time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the classic thing that we've said a million times where it's like absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And we think about like the Library of Alexandria and Alexander the Great burning that to the ground. It's like the things we could know about our past, the things we could know that actually were real or existed, that scholars debate whether they ever happened or not.
I know, yeah.
It's crazy to think, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
It is.
We're jumping up ahead a little bit here now into 830 AD, and he appears again in the History of the Britons. Now, this was written by a guy, and why are all these people's names so hard to pronounce?
Because they're ancient.
Nennius of something other, something.
Nennius the philosopher. No, I'm just kidding.
In this version, he is depicted as, again, a warrior, not a king. So, but like you just said, referred to as if people would already know who he is. Right, so he specifically referred to as a battle leader. Like I'm air quoting here.
Well, the thing is too, you have to remember at this point, especially so early on, and they're in this very murky transitory period of history, and the idea that if you were a successful general, you were considered a king because you actually had real power, right? You know what I mean? Like you had men who respected you and would fight for you. That to me is more of a king than someone sitting on a throne with a crown on his head saying like, oh, I'm the king of whatever. Like that.
Well, and we've learned from Game of Thrones. Learned from Game of Thrones. It's like, no, but really though, because we talk about it all the time because we're watching. We're like halfway. We're catching up.
So obsessed.
But the idea that there's no significance to the capital.
No.
Right? There's no significance to the throne, to the crown.
Not really.
None of it.
It's all symbolic.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So when they turn to Robb Stark before he gets, right, doesn't make it in the end. But King of the North, there you are, king now.
Yeah.
Anybody could say that.
Exactly.
If you got the army to back it up, you can do it.
And even posthumously, he could have been awarded that title.
Right.
And not actually have been it during his lifetime.
Yeah. So in that sense, maybe we are dealing with a king, self-proclaimed, by a group of people, his knights, 150 subjects in a small place that he's protecting. He is maybe a battle leader, but so epic so that he ended up being known as a king throughout history. The next reference is actually called the History of Kings.
Okay.
Now, this was Joffrey.
Oh, God.
Joffrey of Monmouth, or Monmouth.
That name is, that's going to be ruined for me forever. I'm sorry to all the Jeffreys out there who are wonderful people, but I just can't. Joffrey in particular.
Yeah, if you pronounce it if it's Jeffrey, that's great.
Joffrey.
Joffrey.
Yeah. Puke in my mouth a little bit.
I'm sure the actor that plays Joffrey is a fine individual.
No, he's going to be the next Malfoy in the acting world.
You love to hate him, though. You know
What was
what I
that
mean?
one
Like,
horror movie he was in? And it was like this really weird, it was like kind of like a haunting movie where there was this like weird goo in the corner. Remember that? It was like that big dark thing. They were stuck in this house, and it was essentially, yeah. So it started off with like they release a demon or something, and it's filmed like, it's like the style where they have the camcorder and they're all sitting in the room. There's like 4 students, and then Malfoy ends up like dying in the very first scene or something like that. I can't remember the name of that one. If anyone knows that, we should cover it on Film Friday because it was actually kind of a freaky movie.
actually, yeah. Comment on this episode here and let us know if
We
you
should just Google it after.
We
Malfoy in a horror movie.
We'll just get the list of his because that's his real name.
I don't know what his name is.
We just call everybody by their movie names, right? Like the Lannister from the Godzilla movie, the Malfoy from. Oh man. Okay, where was I? Talking
Joffrey.
about the history of kings, and this is a translation. Obviously, it's a Historia Regum Britanniae, History of Kings of Britain. That's terribly pronounced. Written around 1136 AD. So significantly later, right? And he's obviously adding in a little, he's pizzazzing it up, just like the other later versions would be as well.
Like everyone did. Herodotus did it. He did it. I don't know.
Actually, perfect that you say Herodotus because this guy is actually compared to him a lot.
Oh, really?
Historians will often say that this work was basically the medieval equivalent to a New York Times bestseller of fiction. And it was popular not just with British audiences, but actually with Saxon and Norman readers as well.
Really?
Which is kind of ironic. Yeah.
Well, I almost feel like maybe they could have not claimed him as their own, but like it could have been equally inspiring for them,
Yeah, potentially. I mean, he was fighting against these guys, but it's like we said at the beginning, it's like associated with Celtic origins, associated with other groups, and there's a lot going on at this time, right? It is very much like Game of Thrones, tribal factions and people trying to usurp power in small
continental forces trying to overtake the Isles, all this kind of thing. There was the Francia Empire later on, and like the middle era there, but yeah, lots going on.
Yeah,
lots of different people wanting the throne,
right,
so to speak.
Here's the thing that happens though with this publication, right? It comes along with a bunch of other ones. It basically inspires a significant number of other Arthurian tales that were popping up across continental Europe at this time because he was such a famous figure. It was really growing. He pops up in later works as well. So like a 12th century French poet, Chrétien de Troyes. He introduces the concepts of sort of courtly love and kind of the classical stories of Guinevere and Lancelot and the noble knights and trying to save people and this type of thing. It was less dark. This was introduced by a French poet. So it just goes to show how murky it's all getting, right? It's like the line of people. You start a story on one end, you're whispering it through the ears, and you end up with this French poet in the 12th century.
By the 12th century, yeah. So that's quite a number of centuries.
Exactly.
And everyone would have just. It's one of those things, right? You would have just adapted it to your own narrative. You use the figure, you use the iconic sort of the tropes, right, of the time.
Right. So here's the problem. Here's the reference to Herodotus with the History of Kings of Britain. The dates are out of order in his work, so the chronology of events is off.
In the French one?
In the History of Kings of Britain.
That
inspired the French poem.
I see.
And this is his comparison to Herodotus, right? Because he wasn't there right? Herodotus was doing the same thing. He wasn't actually there. He's writing about, what some priest said to a priest said to a priest said to a priest about a bird, but you weren't actually there.
Right.
So his chronology was off in his works as well.
Okay.
Can any of this be taken truthfully?
Right. Can we dissect it and get a nugget of fact or of historical truth out of it? That's a very, so it's so funny. We're already up to the 12th century here.
Yeah.
So we started off with references in the 5th century.
Right.
So in the 500s AD, late 500s, so
That's
like
right.
594.
Yeah.
And now we're all the way up to the 1100s.
Yeah. And moving in further now.
So even by this point, we can argue, even if these people are kind of creating their own sort of fictional masterpiece out of this figure, we, that's where it gets so much more murky as we continue to sort of unravel whether or not this is a real person or not. I almost want to make the case that it's almost like the Mandela effect. Even if he never really existed, he does exist because he exists in the cultural collective unconscious, right?
Yeah. And a mashup of multiple figures potentially.
Exactly.
But I'm still of the mind that he could have been a single figure, and that it's almost the reverse effect. He could have been a single figure that's conflated with a multiple figures.
And now he's like a kaleidoscope of different Arthurs.
Right. There could have been one Arthur. So that's kind of like what we're working with here.
Exactly. And then even if he didn't actually make all those achievements, he just kind of, they just get assigned to him because it just builds it up more.
Yeah, exactly. So he's mentioned again in the 15th century. This is the most recent, most famous, arguably,
Right.
the Orte de Arthur, the Sir Thomas Malory version, talking about his legend, right? And he focuses a lot on the battles of King Arthur.
Yeah.
He's successful in numerous different battles, and in one of them, I mentioned this at the beginning, he even single-handedly kills over 900 men by himself.
Yeah, that's pretty epic.
Pretty epic. We pulled, I think, just 3 of his, there was a whole bunch, but we pulled 3 of his kind of main battles to kind of reference here because they were kind of unique and just leading up to his eventual, disappearance, I guess you would say, in his final battle.
Right. Okay. Or his demise, maybe.
Potentially.
Well, we have the first one here. It's called the Battle at the Mouth of the River Glenny. It's his first battle. And it was pretty local. So there was 2 candidates for this location. So we're deciphering whether or not this is a battle that could really have happened or not. Well, not really happened, but you know what I mean? Like where the possible location of it could have been.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So there was two candidates, 2 big ones. There is one location in Northumberland called the River Glen, and there's also one in Lincolnshire. Well, I don't even know if I'm saying that right. But anyways,
That sounds right.
Yeah, so that's called just the River Glen. You know what's funny too? We have a lot of references to Glen in Kelowna. We've got Glenmore, we've got, there's so many road names that are like have Glen in
Glen
it.
Valley.
Glen Valley, right. And so I was thinking to myself, like, my grandpa's name is Glen. And I was like, what is a Glen? Like, why Glen? Glen just means small valley.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Usually with river, river or some sort of water in it. Yeah, that's pretty cool, hey?
Fun fact of the day. There you go.
I'm full of them, maybe. So there have been excavations, and especially at this one location in, like I said, Northumberland, the Yevering Bell. It's a hill fort.
Okay.
Yeah. So essentially it overlooks the flat area where the River Glen flows into the River Till. So this sort of meeting of the rivers is called the mouth of the River Glen. So that kind of makes sense when we're going back to the reference in Sir Thomas Malory's book there, The Battle at the Mouth of the River Glenny. Okay, pretty good fit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so excavations have shown that it was occupied at the time of Arthur, and it would have been a very strategic location. So he could have commanded his armies from this location to the battle below. So that's pretty cool, hey? So
right.
that to me kind of helps demystify or defantasticalize, if that's a word,
It is now.
the sort of the very colorful writings of Sir Thomas Malory, because he was very much like that.
Yeah.
And just the simple fact that you could do these excavations and find this evidence. You know what? I feel like LiDAR would be very important in all this too.
Definitely. It's starting to be employed in the search for King Arthur, and
Sweet.
remnants of Camelot, remnants of battle areas and stuff like that. And there have been, like tools and swords and iron and things like that found.
Bacon alarm. That bacon's looking pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
Can't wait. All right, let's get into another really significant battle. This was the 9th battle, and it was referenced by, obviously, like Sir Thomas Mallory. All of these were referenced by him. And so this was one that occurred at the city of Legion, and the battle itself was called Kerlion. And essentially, what happened here was obviously another epic battle led by Arthur. Successful battle. And since then, they've excavated, they've found this location.
Yeah.
And so some put forward, well, there is alternatives, but for the most part, this Kerlion has been identified, and it was actually a Roman military base.
Right.
So today, there's actually a town there. It's a few miles north of Newport in southern Wales.
Yeah.
So they actually uncovered ancient Roman military barracks outside the city walls. They can actually still be seen.
Yeah.
So they're the only visible remnants of these legionary barracks of the Romans in Europe. Pretty crazy.
Very
so
cool.
There were multiple buildings, and they were built at about, they think, roughly 75 AD. So this is at the prime after they had invaded the British Isles and they were setting up their rule.
I think, and sorry, just to go back there for a second, I think they mean in like Western Europe, like in the British Isles for Roman legionary barracks, because you'd think, I mean, they got to be remains in the rest of the Roman Empire, right? Throughout Italy and Croatia and these places.
That's how I
right?
interpreted that, yes. Even though it does just say generally in Europe, but I would imagine British Isles.
Yes.
Anyways, but essentially these buildings, so there was multiple buildings, and they would have held between 80 to 100 Roman soldiers. Altogether, these buildings would have the base itself would have housed about 6,000 men. So you can imagine this would have been a really epic battle if Arthur had really taken, if it had really happened, which I'm thinking it did.
He would have been greatly outnumbered even with that 1,600 number, obviously.
1,600 versus 6,000.
Potentially.
Exactly. So then when you get into the whole references of him slaying 1,000 men or 900 men with his sword.
By himself.
And exactly. And a lot of his other men doing that, then you can imagine that would have equaled success, obviously.
There's comparisons to 300 and these types of stories, right?
Being very strategic with how you're going about your battle, yeah.
And that's the hero's journey too, right? I mean, you are overcoming great obstacles. It's not just
the odds are stacked against you.
Always.
All the time.
Always, right?
Yeah.
We're jumping to the final battle. We kind of just chose 3. And this is the Battle of Kamlin. This was his final one because he was mortally wounded. And we don't know exactly where he ended up after this. It's a point of contention.
Mystery.
And it's definitely a mystery. So there's various... the stories differ on how the battle actually started. Joffrey of Mammoth's account is of, it's a normal battle, both sides lined up and then charged into battle, right? The classic kind of medieval way of doing things.
That's not very strategic.
No. In other sources, the battle is set by misunderstanding. So Mallory makes the beginning of the battle a complete misunderstanding. He talks about how a knight is bitten by an adder, which is
snake.
A snake. And he draws his sword to kill the snake. And when the others see this, they assume that it's an attack. And it's basically just this, right, misunderstanding. So that would be pretty unfortunate, right?
That's pretty bad diplomacy.
Yes, it is. Yeah. On whose side, though?
I don't know. People are just jumping the gun there.
Just settle down. You know what I mean? Come on. But of course, basically at the end of this, Arthur, we don't know exactly how, but he is mortally wounded, stabbed. And he's taken to the Isle of Avalon to be healed of his wounds. And this is the last we actually hear of him. This is the last we have any reference to Arthur. And nobody knows where Avalon is.
No.
Right? It's this mysterious place. It's called the Isle. Is it an island? Is it
Is it a peninsula?
Is it a peninsula? Is that just a misnomer to throw people off of where he was actually taken to try to be healed of his wounds, right?
Yeah.
No one knows where this last resting place actually was. But then the monks at Glastonbury Abbey. Now, I don't actually have, where is this? 1539. It was actually destroyed by Henry VIII. So this was just slightly before this. The monks at Glastonbury Abbey find what they believe to be King Arthur's grave beneath the actual structure.
Right.
So they basically stumble upon a hidden chamber, more or less, right? Classic Into the Portal goodness.
It was buried.
That's right. Inside, there was an oak coffin, so they claim, holding the remains of a gigantic man who had been severely wounded in the head.
Oh.
So King Arthur was known to be a large individual, a very intimidating man.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm picturing at the time here, way back in the day, he was probably like, over 6 feet tall.
Probably.
Of well proportioned individual, right?
Yeah.
Buried beside him, so the monks say, was a woman with a plate of gold hair, so like Guinevere. And it also contained a lead cross that actually identified the bones as King Arthur's. It said, quote, here lies buried the famous King Arthur, buried in the Isle of Avalon. So they believed that Glastonbury was Avalon itself.
So it wasn't actually an isle. It was just like a sanctuary or something. Mm-hmm.
What do you make of that?
That's very interesting. The only thing that makes me suspicious about these monks is the fact that we have come across these references before to monks holding artifacts of extremely valuable amounts. That was a really weird way to say that. Extremely valuable artifacts.
Yeah,
Let's say that.
Yeah.
I could see them maybe these monks need a source of income, and perhaps they could have created this in the hopes that they will be, put down in world
Rewarded.
history.
Yeah.
And but at the same time, the fact that there hopefully was actual skeletons, like, is that actually confirmed? Do we know where those bones are now?
So, no. But this is what we do know. So in 1539, the abbey was destroyed by King Henry VIII. Now, this was during power struggles with the Catholic Church and sort of the back and forth Protestant, you know what I mean? That old chestnut, right? Yeah, so the evidence from that initial discovery by the monks has been lost forever. But there has been excavations since. And actually in the 1960s, they did extensive excavations of the abbey. And there were tombs discovered.
Okay.
They had, but they had been. The indication was that they had been access disturbed many times.
Yeah.
Not just the fact that it was like burnt down, destroyed.
What about the cross?
Not there. Gone. She gone.
Because that to me is like, obviously you would have, if you're burying King Arthur, you're going to create something to mark the grave, and that to me, an iron cross, like, that's pretty epic.
Yeah.
The fact that he was buried with his lady again, like.
But here we have with this. We've talked about 3 battles out of, this is just 3 of many. Mm-hmm. All of them have been corroborated as potentially true. There's evidence of the first one. There's a Roman barracks that is definitely there. It would have had soldiers in it. They would have been the ones fighting against people like Arthur that are trying to rise up against them, right? Mm-hmm. The final battle as well, there's some corroborating evidence for that. And then we also have this story from the monks. The abbey was real. The tombs are real. Is their story real? We don't know. We'll never know. But each one of these stories has a dash of truth in it. Mm-hmm.
And that's just it. Is there a nugget of truth to the legend? I think we have established that there is multiple nuggets of truth to the legend.
Definitely.
And, there's another thought that you can add to the layer of this hodgepodge of confusion. Well, not really. But the idea that, what if there was a line of Arthurs? What if Arthur had a son who took over?
Well,
you know what I mean? Like,
right. And I mean, like, for this episode, we don't get into that because there's so many different characters. There are
Yes.
sons, like there are figures that are like, Arthur's son.
Yeah.
Multiple figures that are his wife. Sometimes it's referred to, like, I think Guinevere is sometimes referred to as his sister, sometimes referred to as his wife.
Wasn't there something going on with her and Lancelot too?
There's all kinds of weird mishmash,
And that's
different
that to me is like the
roles.
soap opera version of the history, right? So not actually.
Yes. Also, it is possibly a weird kind of like misunderstanding because people often had the same names back in these days, right?
Yeah,
So
totally.
he very well could have a sister that's named such and such and then marries someone named such and such as well. And it's just poorly kept records, right?
Yeah.
We're kind of getting into, not the end here, but we're getting into Camelot because that is the sort of third thing, I guess. We're looking for proof of the battles, trying to find his bones, Glastonbury Abbey. The other thing we can do to try to prove if he was a real person or not is find Camelot. This was his kingdom, right? This was where the throne was for him.
Yeah.
So the legendary location of Arthur's Round Table. Can you imagine if you could actually find the Round Table itself?
Oh my goodness.
That would be epic, right?
That's like finding Noah's Ark.
Basically would be. Totally would be. There's 4 proposed sites for the very real Camelot to have been located, right? The court of King Arthur. And it's funny because the Round Table doesn't actually appear until Joffrey of Mammoth, Monmouth. Ugh, Joffrey. Right?
Monmouth?
Yeah, this is pronounced. I typed this in differently.
Oh, okay.
It's like Mon. Anyway, Joffrey, what a guy. But he wrote this history of the kings of Britain, right? And this is in this he mentions the great castle, massive distinction from the other earlier references to Arthur as a war leader, right? Like in a wooden shelter, not in a castle, not with a round table with 1,600 men. I don't really know, right? He writes about a great castle that sits atop a mighty hill looking over a valley. But where could this have been?
Where indeed?
Was this a real place? So, of course, the need for Camelot and the heroics of Arthur is based on the Saxons, the enemy, the Saxons, right? But in the modern search, we know that their relationship is actually more nuanced. It wasn't so much like just starch enemies of each other.
Starch.
Staunch. Staunch enemies of each other, right? So that kind of complicates things too, because that could put Camelot in any number of different places.
Okay, so there's a few different ones that we're going to talk about then, hey?
Right.
Okay. So the first one would be in South Wales. This is known as a Kerlion. This is referred to by Joffrey, and it's also referred to by that French poet from the 12th century, that Chrétien de Troyes. And this places Camelot in Kerlion, South Wales. So, like we said, this is one of 3 Roman legionary forts of Britain.
Maybe he took over a fort then.
Well, he could have easily, right? If you defeat them in battle, then obviously you take over the territory. And like we said, right, this was excavated and it would have been strategic. So why wouldn't you take it over?
And that's why it's mentioned in later works rather than the earlier works, potentially.
Perhaps. So the Welsh, so we're in South Wales here. It's actually kind of interesting, though. The word Kerlion, even though it sounds kind of, I'm pronouncing it very French, I'm so sorry, but it sounds typically Celtic, according to most people. But it's actually a corruption of 2 Latin words, meaning fortress and legion. So castrum and legio, which again, sorry, mispronouncing that. I feel like that's just like the curse of the show, is to me just mispronouncing everything.
I'm just gonna go ahead and say this now. I don't care.
Well, we say that we don't care, and then we go ahead and care.
I don't.
I'm gonna just care a little bit.
All right.
I'll care a tiny bit, just because I know it does irk some people.
Screw those people. I'm sorry.
Hey, be nice. Okay, so interestingly enough, the Welsh are direct descendants of the Romano-Britons of England and Wales. Did you hear that?
What was that?
That was my stomach.
That sounded like Godzilla rising from the depths.
It sounded like thunder to me.
I don't know if you guys heard that on the mic. I wish we could have sound.
If you heard that, and I heard it in my headphones, so everyone's gonna hear that.
Oh man, Amber's getting hungry.
Yeah, I need my bacon.
Getting hungry.
I need the bacon, man.
Oh man, all right.
Okay. But anyways, I was going back to the Welsh here.
You patrons sure get the raw. You get the raw ITP.
You do.
You get the real Amber and Andrew,
uncut.
man.
Wow.
This is us, guys.
This is us. Just like that.
This is me now.
Okay. Welsh. Oh my goodness. Okay, so like I said, these were descendants of the Romano-Britons of England and Wales, who were essentially pushed back towards the west of Britain by the Anglo-Saxons in the 5th and 6th centuries. Yeah, so Arthur, obviously considered a perhaps Romano-British leader, fighting, obviously, these Anglo-Saxon invaders. So the idea that this could have been at Kerlion is actually quite plausible. It would have been very strategic, like I already mentioned, right?
Definitely.
So if you win the battle there, even if it had evidence of being overrun by Romans, those Romans were gone by 410. So there you go.
Right, and this sort of description is that he may have had connections with it, right? He wasn't just a Briton, a tribal Briton fighting the Romans. He may have been one himself, in a way.
Sorry, he might have been Roman, is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, like,
Or part Roman?
The dates are off, right? Like, we don't know what the exact range, right? So even when you're dealing with a range, it's like, okay, maybe this happened 50 years earlier than this. That's a long time. Like, that's enough time for... Anyway, we don't know what his background is, and there is a theory that he was a Roman centurion. We'll talk about that in a sec.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I like the idea that maybe he was a bit of a bastard. Maybe his father was a Roman, his mother was a Briton.
It's like Jon Snow.
Yeah.
That actually makes sense. I mean, he would be the figure to... You got nothing to lose when you're in that situation, right?
True.
You can rise up and you can kill 900 men, and if you die, it don't matter.
Rise up.
God.
Sorry.
You guys walk into a Sunday service here? Like, what's going on here? Oh, man.
Let's get into another possible location.
Sure.
Because we've got one in Somerset. And it's known as Cadbury Castle, not the name of the chocolate factory.
Cadbury.
Oh, it's chocolate.
Damn.
So this is an Iron Age hill fort that is located in Somerset near Yeovil. And that again, sorry.
That one was me. I don't know if you guys heard that. That one was my stomach that time. Oh, boy.
Okay.
We're hungry. Okay.
Anyway, so this was actually referred to as a location of Fort Camelot by the antiquarian John Leland in his itinerary of 1542. So this is quite reference. This is quite old, this reference.
Yeah.
Leland actually fervently believed that King Arthur was real, and he was a historical fact. So there have been archaeological excavations of the site, which reveal a substantial building, which could have housed a great hall. And it's also clear that some of these Iron Age defenses had been re-fortified, creating an even larger, extensive defensive site, larger than any known fort of this period. Actually, this is interesting, there were shards of pottery from the Eastern Mediterranean found, showing great wealth and trade. So it seems probable that this hill fort was a castle or palace during the Dark Ages for a ruler or king, someone such as Arthur.
That makes sense because we know during this period it wasn't as extensive trade. It wasn't as, it was the Dark Ages, right? So it's like you would have needed to be a king to have things like that coming from the Mediterranean for sure. You would have needed to be a person of significance.
Yes, or to be someone greatly respected that would have had gifts of this sort of stature bestowed upon you. Whether it was a gift, whether it was acquired through trade, we don't know.
Right, right.
Yeah.
There is a few other, there's a couple other places that could be the location, and one is referenced by, again, Geoffrey, and he talks about the birthplace of King Arthur possibly being Tintagel Castle. Tintagel?
Of Cornwall?
Of Cornwall. Interesting, right? So a 1,500-year-old piece of slate with 2 Latin inscriptions was found at this site in the late 1980s, which would seem to link Arthur to this place, potentially. The second inscription on the slate reads, Artogno, okay, father of a descendant of Coll, has had made King Cole, old King Cole, the nursery rhyme comes from this, I guess, is said by Joffrey of Mammoth to be one of Arthur's ancestors. Trying to find the lineage of Arthur here.
Okay.
There's obviously super contentious when it comes to this idea, with this site actually being newer than the possible, like, a 1,500-year-old piece of slate.
That's really old.
Yeah. No, like that's within range. I mean, we're obviously...
It's within range, but yeah, you're right. It would have been maybe not a direct descendant, but an ancestor.
Right. That's an interesting idea. But obviously we're going with it, like, he was born here, stayed there. That's the location of Camelot. You know what I mean? Like, just like a ruler would be born to the throne and you stay on the throne type of deal. I don't know about that. Another location is Winchester, Hampshire.
Hampshire? Oh, okay.
And this, of course, comes from Thomas Mallory, 15th century work that we've mentioned. Yeah, it said that Winchester Castle was the court of Camelot. And that's just what Thomas Mallory says.
You mean Winchester Castle?
Winchester Castle was where Camelot was located. So another totally different place. Each book has its own Camelot.
Yeah. I feel like we're not really getting very far with this one, hey? This is kind of a nugget that, to me, this is the piece of the puzzle that is the most fantastical, especially when you get into the later references to these elaborate round tables, to the, like this great hall and all this kind of thing. Like, for me, especially during this time, right? Perhaps in a moment of history, something like this could have existed quite briefly and then perhaps could have been burned down quite easily too. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, so it could have maybe existed and then quickly gone away. It actually could have been all 4 of these locations that we've talked about at different periods of time.
Potentially. Potentially.
Because I would imagine that, again, right, just thinking about the instabilities of the time, you would have been a little bit more mobile. Like your court would have been more mobile. And as a military commander, you would have been definitely more mobile because you're always on the road. So whether or not you do have this sort of legendary place that you can go back to that's like brick and mortar, or if you're constantly kind of shifting it around, and then it's just up to the creative imaginations of these later writers and poets and historians and whatever else, right?
Yeah, no,
So that's
I'm
kind of my
vibing
thoughts on it, because like to me, all of these are kind of like, they're very loose, but again, there is little threads.
Yeah, no, there definitely is.
Loose threads.
Loose threads. Let's jump right into evidence and theories then.
Sure.
I mean, the whole episode has been discussing evidence and
Yeah.
theories, basically, right?
Yeah.
But
Let's
we
jump
can kind of like just sort of reiterate some of these things. So Glastonbury Abbey was one of the best possible pieces of evidence. Of course, we don't have the evidence anymore, other than the fact that we know there was burial spots here. So 1962, we mentioned there was the archaeological dig, found evidence of a tomb, but it had been disturbed. So there was burial spots here. So we're just going on the word of the monks.
Yeah. A lot of people get buried at abbeys, though. You know what I mean?
But if the cross was real, that's
True.
the thing.
And
That's
that-
the thing we don't know.
That to me is the annoying part, because that cross made of iron should have been around. It's hard to destroy a huge metal
Who says
cross.
it's destroed? It's
Or
just
just
not.
buried
It's just
or-
gone.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking back to like when Louis VIII destroyed the whole place.
Yeah, what a great guy.
Yeah.
The idea. Okay, there's also the idea we mentioned that he could have been mistaken for another historical figure, and one of the most interesting ones with this is that he could have been a Roman centurion named Lucius Artorius. So, who fought against the Picts. So these were northern tribes that in the Dark Ages of Scotland, right? Like basically tribes of Scotland. Fought against them on Hadrian's Wall in the 2nd century AD. So, sort of some 300 years earlier than the time at which Arthur actually, the dates are normally set. So again, unlikely that this would actually be the source of Arthur, but some people do believe that he could have been a Roman centurion.
Or what if that was his father?
Hey, there you go. That actually
that's
makes
going
sense.
back to my whole like Life of Brian kind of like.
Well, actually, though, seriously, that kind of makes sense potentially, right?
Jon Snow. Yeah. I like that idea.
All right. What else do we have here?
I like that idea. So that means it's more true. No, I'm just kidding.
Other people believe he could have been a Scottish king, right? A 6th century Scottish king. So not specifically
okay.
king of the Britons or whatever, but
somewhere on the Isles. Okay. There was that guy, David Carroll, who's a historian. He has spent more than 25 years researching this legend and the idea that Arthur could have been a real person. And this sort of quest of his, I like that.
epic quest.
His epic modern quest has taken him all over Europe. And he's examined a lot of ancient documents, a lot of manuscripts, a lot of pretty reliable historical sources.
Yeah.
And he actually found a manuscript hidden away in a restricted section of the town library in a little tiny town called Schaffhausen in Switzerland. And this David Carroll actually believes that he has irrefutable proof that Arthur was actually sourced from a 6th century Scottish prince. So the Arthurian legend was actually this Scottish guy.
Right.
And this manuscript is actually referred to as the Dornebe manuscript, and it was written by 7th century monks. So it's one of the oldest historical documents in the world to mention Arthur. We make that reference, historical document versus like a piece of literature, even though that
like
could
a
be
poem
considered.
or whatever,
Exactly. So yeah, this story, he's actually referred to as Arturius, and it's pretty much identical to that of the legendary king we all know today as King Arthur. So there's a lot of parallels going on here.
Is that the same name as the Roman centurion? No. The last name, Artorius. Lucius Artorius, and then down here we've got
Arturius, so it's a
first
U
name.
instead of an O. And it's, well, but that's just it though. Like a lot of people were referred to by their surnames back in the day.
Very
so
true.
You never know. Yeah.
All right.
So yeah, this more modern idea. So in recent years, this idea of like a forbidden secret history has emerged.
Right.
Especially in regards to the King Arthur legends. Yeah. And yeah, there's definitely been a lot of sort of like conspiracy-led pop culture fiction, or like what we can refer to as King Arthur creepypastas.
Yeah, very true.
Just people taking on. And it's interesting because this is actually a modern version of what potentially was just going on in the 6th centuries too, you know what I
Yeah,
mean? And all the way
definitely.
up throughout the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages and the High, whatever.
Totally.
So that's kind of fun. What really though, like, what are your thoughts? Like, when we're coming down to the end of this, like, we've done a summary research of this topic. We haven't gone extensively into, you know, like,
This could be an entire podcast
really
on
could.
in and of itself.
it could. We tend to do that all the time. Eh?
We do. We pick topics that are way bigger than we can handle sometimes.
Scope. But we love it.
We do. Having read all this stuff and talked about this for a while here now, I'm of the mind that he probably was a real person, or at least that there was a real person. That was the basis of the legend, obviously.
A nugget.
He may not have been named Arthur, right? Like we're looking here that there's sort of these Latin versions of what it would have morphed into with the stories of Arthur. But I think there really was a guy. I think there really was a guy who was slaughtering 900 people on the battlefield. And that's where at least the nugget came from.
Well, even so, like, you know, we talked about this again, the idea of exaggerating historical fact. In even in our very first episode, right? Was it 50,000 men that were swallowed up in the sea of
Right.
sand, or was it really 500, or maybe 5,000? What if King Arthur? It's pretty epic to think that someone could even slay 90 people in a battle. So you just tack on another zero, just make it that much more epic and
That's
that
right.
much more unachievable to the, you know, everyday average Joe Blow back in the day.
Right.
Then you're creating the legend.
But that to me, yeah, totally. That to me is there's sort of two versions of secret history, like we mentioned here at the end, and that's where like the hardcore historians are like, Arthur's not real. You know what I mean? The Ark of the Covenant's never going to be found. Like these types of things, because there's no proof. I need hardcore proof. I need it right in front of my face for it to be true. And they don't believe in the idea of secret history or hidden history, right? Like the things that people, like that's the conspiracy theory to them.
Or
But
not even lost. Maybe not
Lost.
hidden, but lost.
lost, and it's lost for two different reasons. Lost because it's straight up can't be found, like there's no records of something, right? Or lost because it's exaggerated. It's lost there's parts of it is true, but we don't know because it's lost. Was it 90? Was it 900? Was it 50,000? Was it 500?
That's just it.
These things are true, but to what extent? So that is the secret history too, right? But
Yeah.
if there's not people like us that are like believing in the weird craziness, nothing would ever get found, discovered.
There would be no drive to kind of confirm or deny, or you know what I mean? Like either way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is still ongoing. People are looking for King Arthur's bones. People are looking for the court of Camelot still to this day. LiDAR is relatively new. I think we're going to find it. I think we're going to find something that people will definitively be able to point to and say. Maybe we'll even find the cross.
Yeah.
You never know.
You never know. Even I'm just going to go back to my first thought. Well, one of my first thoughts on the top of the episode there. The idea that even if Arthur wasn't the Arthur that we think of, that's right. Like he could have been a real person. He could have been a great general. There could have been maybe a conflation of a couple different great generals. But the idea that he does exist in the collective unconscious of
Yeah.
so many people throughout so many centuries, all the way up to right now where we're sitting in modern times.
Yeah.
That
for
to
sure.
me, in my head, that means that he is a real person, right? Whether or not he really was flesh and bones. Like,
That's an interesting way to take it. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, history is a weird thing, right?
Yeah.
History is it's kind of a weird thing.
we want to know what all of y'all think, though.
Yeah.
So get at us with your theories. If you have any other ideas or any other evidence that we didn't really talk about,
Yeah.
because let's get the conversation going on Patreon. We want to connect with you all.
Yeah, we haven't really done that yet. Like, we don't get a lot of conversations going on here, but we definitely want to know what you guys have to think. Like, do you believe he was a real person?
If you guys have any interesting articles that you want us to post on the Patreon feed, that would be awesome, because then that would really help get the conversation going.
Definitely. All right, well, we're going to try to do that, and we look forward to chatting with you guys about King Arthur and the legend of King Arthur.
Yeah, so thank you to all of you for all your patience and understanding.
Seriously,
It's
thank you.
been such a weird time in our lives. It's just
Yeah.
so crazy.
It is.
We're sitting down Saturday morning, we get up, put the coffee on, and we're like, okay, let's get this done. Let's record this. We got the bacon going. I got to get to work. And it's like, yeah, it's crazy.
Oh, yeah. It's fun, but it's crazy. So,
Yeah.
yeah, thank you for your patience, guys. And Yeah. If you don't feel like commenting on here, you can always email us, right? Into the portal mailbox at gmail.com. And stay tuned for, we're already into June here, so stay tuned for June Patreon exclusives that are be coming down the pipe for you guys.
If you have any suggestions, let us know. We have a few ideas and we're kind of working on a few different topics, but it's all really open. So we're always open.
Always
so get
open.
at us.
Always. And thank you so much for listening. And until next time on Into the Portal.
Your gateway to the bizarre.
This podcast is a part of Straight Up Strange Productions. Discover more shows like this one at straightupstrange.com.